Old Joe, a brain of feathers and a heart of lead. Good morning. It is Wednesday, September the 21st, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the daily declaration for spiritual warfare and the Pledge of Allegiance and the Star-Spangled Banner, we'll have Christy Teigen, Martha's Vineyard, mark-kaye 1, 2, and 3, Don Lemon, Alex Epstein, student loans, Hannity DeSantis, Tucker Carlson, no free lunch. All that and more when I come back. Thank you. And now the daily declaration for spiritual warfare for September the 21st. Let me not be like those who would not walk in your ways and are not obedient to your laws. I present myself to obey you, Lord, and I will cast down anything that exalts itself against your knowledge, bringing all my thoughts captive to my determination to follow the obedience of Christ. I will obey you so that I may enter into your rest. I will receive your blessings because I obey all your ways. Amen. And that was the daily declaration for spiritual warfare for September the 21st. Thank you. Why am I the only true conservative in the United States today? Because I'm the only person in the United States of America that knows that the government has no rights. Back in a minute. Thank you. What is the true conservative's strategy for defeating the left? True conservatives must take the Democrats' issues away from them. True conservatives must convince the country that they are the party of gun control, feminism, environmentalism, and racial diversity. To win, the true conservative must fight to own the left's issues. The left claims that there exists left-wing issues and right-wing issues. Wrong. The left claims women's rights, the environment, civil rights, racial and sexual, labor, and poverty as their issues. Wrong. If true conservatives are allowed the left to define political positions, they will never win. True conservatives must fight for all political constituencies if they hope to survive and thrive. To fight and win these battles, we must appeal to people's natural conservative tendencies. The true conservative is the true feminist, true environmentalist, true civil rights champion, and true friend to labor and the poor, because that's the way it is. We respect the independence of the individual, regardless of who they are, while the left demands fealty and obedience. Thank you very much. And now there's No Free Lunch by David-Bahnsen. Quote, your argument is that the technological advance should result in a general price decline. But to a classical economist, that's like saying that as modern golfers hit the ball farther and further with better equipment, the yardstick should gradually lengthen. When the dollar is kept stable, technological advances are translated into shorter units of time needed to produce goods and services. Unquote. Jude Wanniski. Prices may come down in a market economy from competitive forces at play, but the advances that we want in a growing economy are not price declines or increases, as much as improved quality of life in the process of producing goods and services. The focus on price makes the unit of measurement the activity instead of the underlying activity. It is highly convoluted. While ample disagreements exist as to how to achieve sound and stable money, it is the disregard for the objective of sound money that has been most disruptive. And that was There's No Free Lunch by David-Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now an article from, let's see, who is this from? As if this is The Federalist. Okay, good. So, and it's about Chrissy Teigen, and the title is Chrissy Teigen Misconstruing Son's Death to Score Pro-Abortion Points Remind Us She's the Worst. Teigen is rewriting the facts of her miscarriage so she can use her tragedy as a weaponized sob story to push abortion. Chrissy Teigen is a bully, and almost every headline she scores is for something that makes her less likable. But 2 years ago, she earned the sympathy of even her critics when she announced the tragic loss of her son, Jack, around the 20th week of her pregnancy. Now, she's capitalizing on that loss to make a political jab, rewriting the facts so she can use her tragedy as a weaponized sob story to manipulate public opinion, or at least the opinions of the 14 people on Earth who still put stock in what she says. Speaking at a summit on Thursday in a talk titled, We Made That Choice, Teigen claimed that the Supreme Court's reversal of its unconstitutional Roe v. Wade decision sparked a realization for her that the miscarriage for which she'd soaked up global sympathy was actually an abortion, like what those evil Republicans want to ban. How convenient. I told the world we had a miscarriage. The world agreed we had a miscarriage. All the headlines said it was a miscarriage, and I became really frustrated that I didn't in the first place say what it was. And I felt silly that it would take me over a year to actually understand that we had an abortion, she said, according to The Hollywood Reporter. It became very clear around halfway through that he would not survive and that I wouldn't either without any medical intervention, Teigen elaborated. Let's just call it what it was. It was an abortion. Abortion to save my life for a baby that had absolutely no chance. Even if Teigen is telling the truth about what happened, which is of some doubt, since she's proven she'll go to great lengths for attention, she's manipulating words and definitions to score political points that have nothing to do with her story. No one is trying to ban saving a mother's life. First of all, the tragic death of a child in utero in order to save his mother's life is legal in every state. No one is seeking to force mothers to die trying to carry their babies to term, just like no one is seeking to criminalize miscarriage. A miscarriage, since Teigen claims to have not understood the difference, is understood as the spontaneous and unintentional loss of a child in the womb, different from an abortion, which is induced with the intent of ending the pregnancy and, by extension, the baby's life. Medical clearing of a mother's womb after a baby has spontaneously died in utero is also not abortion. So for Tegan to describe a tragic but not legally controversial situation as an abortion, something leftists like her want to allow for any reason up to the moment a baby's being born, is plain dirty. Why a grieving mother would deliberately politicize the death of her child, I can't comprehend. But her motive aside, Tegan's alleged situation in the abortions that are the subject of abortion bans are not at all the same thing. Is the goal to kill the baby? Even if Tegan did admit to a life-saving procedure knowing her baby wouldn't survive it, she shared that her baby already had no chance of survival anyway. The intended goal of the procedure matters. Tegan didn't share the details of her medical procedure, but in her initial post, she wrote to her son, "I'm so sorry that the first few moments of your life were met with so many complications that we couldn't give you the home you needed to survive. We were never able to stop the bleeding and give our baby the fluids he needed despite bags and bags of blood transfusions," Tegan added. Often doctors will address life-threatening maternal health risks by delivering a baby early, which Tegan's description suggests likely happened here. That's hardly the same thing as reaching a vacuum or pincers into a mother's womb and ripping out her baby limb by limb. Not only is delivery more humane to the pain-capable baby, it has a different goal. In one instance, the baby's inability to survive outside the womb after delivery is a tragic casualty of the inducement required to save his mother's life. But it is not the goal of the procedure. And the other, discarding the baby's life, body, and existence, is precisely the goal. Pro-life advocates make this distinction all the time, and it's cruelly dishonest of Tegan to ignore it, though in her defense it's possible she's just that ignorant. Once again, Tegan is making everything about her. Tegan's ploy for abortion lovers' accolades is also cruel to mothers who have survived miscarriages or who have been through life-saving procedures that cost the lives of their babies. For Tegan to paint their tragedies as abortions is to cast unfair and unnecessary guilt on them for circumstances completely unlike those of a woman going to her local Planned Parenthood to get rid of a baby she doesn't want. Roughly 3 in 4 women who get abortions do so simply because they think having a baby would dramatically change my life. For a husband and wife to go through the decision-making process that leads to delivering a baby early to save the mother's life must surely be excruciating. And my heart goes out to Tegan and her husband, John Legend, for ever being in such a position. But if Tegan is going to deceptively misconstrue the death of her son and then capitalize on it to score political points with the pro-abortion crowd, that's where my sympathy stops. And that was by L. Purnell, an assistant editor at The Federalist, and that was the article about Chrissy Teigen misconstruing her son's death to score pro-abortion points, reminding us that she is the worst. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, an article, let's see here, from The Federalist, another article from The Federalist, and it's titled, "If Martha's Vineyard Tried to Prove It Cares About Immigrants, It Failed Miserably." When Republican governors sent 50 migrants to Martha's Vineyard, it's a humanitarian crisis. When 51 migrants who were encouraged to cross the border by Democrats die in the back of a truck, well, that's a statistic. And this is by Mark Hemingway. In September of 2014, I found myself in a town hall meeting in Lexington, Nebraska, population 10,000. It's a meatpacking town about 3 hours west of Omaha and not what one would call a wealthy town. I was there on a campaign stop with Senator Ben Sasse, and the people of Lexington were very concerned with one issue in particular: what to do about the 11 Central American kids the federal government had dropped off unannounced in Lexington the month prior, just before the start of school. There had been a rapid influx of unaccompanied minors crossing the border that summer, and the Obama administration just relocated many of them around the country in towns such as Lexington. It bears repeating that these were children that needed taken care of. Whatever social service you think are needed to take care of regular migrants, this was a much bigger and more expensive issue for the town. Self-sufficiency wasn't just a matter of finding them work. These kids had to be clothed, fed, educated, and generally looked after for years. The townspeople were alternately irate about being put into this situation and genuinely concerned for the kids' welfare.
Given the town's limited resources, after listening to the townspeople plead for help, we got on the campaign bus and drove to the next stop. For all I know, these migrant kids are still in Lexington, and the community of Lexington is hardly unique. Hundreds, if not thousands, of American towns have had to rise to meet challenges as a result of federal refugee resettlement. Perhaps you can start to see why I was unimpressed with the residents of Martha's Vineyard for harboring 50 migrants for 2 days before sending in the military to herd them off. And yet, because the DeSantis stunt, and there are valid objections to flinging migrants hither and yon to make a point, exposed a great deal of hypocrisy among Democrats, there's a campaign afoot to portray Martha's Vineyard as a model of compassion for the way they treated these immigrants. In my wildest dreams, I could not have made up CNN's headline that was this unintentionally parodic and unflattering. Quote, "They enriched us. Migrants' 44-hour visit leaves indelible mark on Martha's Vineyard," unquote. Or take this gauzy Washington Post profile of a Bolivian immigrant turned Martha's Vineyard real estate agent, please. In case you're wondering, the average home price on the island is over $1 million, so the commissions are decent. The woman took a day or so off to help the migrants and gather supplies for them, which is, I confess, admirable behavior. But it's a drop in the bucket compared to the ongoing volunteer work being done in border towns such as El Paso, Del Rio, and Yuma, which likely see 50 or more new migrants every hour. And yet those volunteers get little flattering national press coverage, let alone something as tone-deaf as this. Quote, "As the migrants said goodbye to the local volunteers who had provided them with food and shelter, many in the group cried. Watching them leave, Lima cried too. You just hope that they land where they're supposed to," she said, unquote. Indeed, where are they supposed to land? It can't possibly be on Martha's Vineyard because, well, excuses. The island's permanent population of 30,000 regularly accommodates 150,000 visitors a year. But it's after Labor Day, so it's off-season, and they can't accommodate a fraction of the average attendance of one of the many weddings on the island, or something. And one of the wealthiest enclaves in America supposedly doesn't have the resources to provide the social services necessary to help. In fact, Martha's Vineyard is so broke, it started a GoFundMe to help with the 44-hour ordeal. Yes, the town actually issued a statement calling it a humanitarian crisis. The GoFundMe, which is since closed, was organized by Sarah Goulet on behalf of the Martha's Vineyard Community Foundation. Sarah Goulet is a New York communications executive whose clientele seems to consist largely of art galleries, and her husband is a journalist at GQ magazine. She's apparently made 6 campaign donations to Kamala Harris, our deeply unpopular vice president, and border czar, who recently assured us that our southern border is secure. As for the Martha's Vineyard Community Foundation, it's already sitting on a slush fund of $16 million. According to the foundation, they're using the money for efforts addressing the effects of climate change on the island, eradicating racism, removing the barriers that prevent equal rights for all, and ultimately eliminating inequality and injustice. Once again, I must attest to the fact that these details are real, not parody. Now, how many community organizers do you think there are in Lexington, Nebraska, that have $16 million to help solve civic problems? A single charity on Martha's Vineyard, and one heavily committed to social justice causes, could have easily supported 50 migrants on the island indefinitely until they were self-sufficient and fully incorporated into the community. Well, there's just one problem left to address. That's a housing crisis on the island. Fortunately, former President Barack Obama has 29 acres on the island. Surely he could donate a plot of land and tap his own personal fortune. The deal for the Obama's memoirs alone was worth $65 million to construct a shelter for these people seeking a better life here in America, right? After all, it's the least he can do. Obama is personally responsible for many of the immigration policies that created this humanitarian crisis, and he's directly responsible for burdening other towns such as Lexington, which didn't seem to have the option of sending their migrants elsewhere. By now, the point here should be clear. There are no easy answers to the problems of mass immigration, But however distasteful you think it is for Republican governors to use actual migrants to prove a point, the fact is that Martha's Vineyard voters and Massachusetts Democrats are all too happy to vote for immigration policies that are cynical political ploys they think will benefit Democrats electorally, even as they themselves tell themselves that what they're doing is compassionate. In reality, their concern seems to be solely about optics and virtue signaling. When Republican governors send 50 migrants unannounced to Martha's Vineyard, it's a humanitarian crisis that gets days of national media coverage. When 51 migrants who are encouraged to illegally cross the border by the actions of Democrat politicians die in the back of tractor-trailer abandoned by coyotes in the Texas heat, well, that's a statistic. When 50 migrants show up in Martha's Vineyard, there's a housing crisis, so they must be sent elsewhere. When 10,000 Haitian migrants cross the border with nowhere to go, it's fine if they have to sleep under a bridge indefinitely, so long as that is a problem of Del Rio, Texas. Sending migrants to Martha's Vineyard may have been a distasteful stunt, but the point was very effectively made, and the attempts to spin what happened aren't hiding the truth. When it comes to immigration, there is no upper bound to the burdens and suffering progressive elites will demand of others. There's definitely an upper bound to the burden they're willing to endure themselves and in their own rich enclaves. It is appallingly low. And that was an article by Mark Hemingway and in the Federalist. Back in a minute.
Thank you. And now, mark-kaye.
They are immigration invasion deniers, and they are a threat to the Republic. Not a made-up threat to the Republic like what's his name? Joe Biden said MAGA Republicans were. Not a made-up threat to the Republic like Joe Biden said anyone who voted for Donald Trump is. Not a phony threat to the Republic, but a real gosh darn threat to the Republic. Immigration invasion deniers. And they're everywhere. Not just Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris, she kicked this whole thing off. Nobody told her. Well, maybe they did. Nobody told her, though, to go on the Sunday shows. Nobody told her to go on the Church of Liontology, and now you know why we call it that, and say that there is nothing wrong with the border. Nobody told her to go on with Chuck Todd and lie about the border being secure. She did that on her own.
We have a secure border.
We have a secure border? Oh, really? Corinne Jean-Pierre was asked about whether or not we have a secure border yesterday in the press briefing.
I'm just going to refer back to the vice president. We agree with her. She is saying that there's a lot of work to do, right? She also said that in that very statement. We agree that the border is secure, but there is still more work to be done.
They agree. Now, keep in mind, Corinne Jean-Pierre, she speaks supposedly for Joe Biden. She speaks for the President of the United States.
We agree that the border is secure.
So the Vice President of the United States, the President of the United States, they both agree that the border is secure. Either they're lying or they're stupid. Or, let's be honest, could be a little bit of both, because the border's not secure. And we know that because yesterday, Griff Jenkins was talking to a dude outside of Kamala Harris's house, and he said, is the border secure?
And Vice President Harris said that the border is closed. Is the border closed? Do you believe that the border is closed, or is it open?
It's open, not closed. The border is open.
The border is open. Do you believe that all the migrants believe that the border is open?
Yeah, everybody believes that the border is open. It's open because we enter. We come in.
Yeah, we're here.
Free.
No, we're here. We came in. We're free. We're standing in front of you, being interviewed in Washington D.C. in front of the Naval Observatory. Of course, the border's open. So, who are you going to believe? The President of the United States, Kamala Harris, or this guy who just walked across the border from Mexico? I'm going to be honest with you. I believe the guy who walked across the border from Mexico. He came from Venezuela. He walked into the country. Nobody stopped him. They put him on a plane to Florida, they put him on a bus to Washington D.C. And now he's an international superstar. Now this guy's on the news saying, "Hey, the Vice President, the President of the United States, the press secretary, they're all lying. They are denying what is a very, very serious issue." Luckily, there's people in this country that take it seriously. There's people like Super Governor Ron DeSantis from the League of Extraordinary Governors. There's people like Super Governor Gregory Abbott from the League of Extraordinary Governors, and they are using, and this is the other thing too, people are so mad at Ron DeSantis for spending money, $12 million to get these immigrants to Martha's Vineyard. That's taxpayer money. That's Florida taxpayer money that he's using to ship these people all over the country. Yeah, it is. You shouldn't be mad at Ron DeSantis. You should be mad at Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. You should be mad at Joe Biden, because Joe Biden is the one who is neglecting his duty, who is shirking his responsibility, who is saying, the border's fine. And Kamala Harris, who's out there saying the border is secure. Blame them, because they're not using the government funds that are allocated to border control and border security to secure the border. Instead, they're sending it all to Ukraine. So the governor of Texas, the governor of Florida, they've got to use their own taxpayer dollars to solve the problem locally, to keep their citizens safe, and to keep the focus on what is a major international crisis. Joe Biden is ignoring it, and Ron DeSantis is forcing Floridians to pick up the tab. Don't be mad at him. Be mad at the guy in the White House.
And again, that was mark-kaye. Back in a minute. Thank you, and some more mark-kaye.
I talked about this on my podcast this morning. Mark-Kaye Saves the Republic. There was a lot of talk about the talk, and if you're a black family, if you come from a black family, if you're African American, the talk is something that's very colloquial, and it's known throughout the United States as something that African American parents do with their kids when they come of age, teenage years, especially when they start driving. They sit them down and they talk to them about how to deal with police officers should they get pulled over, how to act respectfully, how not to mouth off, to make sure you have your license on you, put your hands on the wheel, listen to what they do, because there's this whole notion that the police departments are systemically racist, and that as a young black person you will be unfairly treated by police officers. So the talk is kind of a rite of passage with many African American families here in the United States. I believe that I will, and you will, Hannah, when you have kids, and anyone else, Jay, if you're a conservative in this country, if you're an ultra MAGA conservative, if you are somebody who loves the Constitution, if you love the Bill of Rights, if you are patriotic, if you are patriotic, if you fly the flag, if you chant "Let's go Brandon," if you post on your Facebook page anything that says Trump 2024, I believe that you're going to have to sit down and have a similar talk with your kids. Only this time you're going to have to say, look, you are conservative. There's going to be a point in your life when you are approached by, or harassed by, or raided by, or searched by the FBI. And when they do that, here's what you do. Call them sir. Hand them the phone. Ask to see the search warrant. Ask to call your attorney, but be polite, because you never know. It could be the last time any of us see you. So and I want you to understand that this is real. This is serious stuff. Being a conservative in America, you have to watch out for Joe Biden, Merrick Garland, the Department of Justice, and the FBI. And if a black SUV shows up and a guy in a suit, or in here in Florida they wear golf shirts, if a guy in a golf shirt and khaki pants and dark shades walks out and says, "May I please see your cell phone? I have a warrant," then you give it to him. Because that's the new thing, man. That's going to be the talk that conservatives have to have with their kids, is you got to know how to deal with the FBI. Otherwise, you're going to be in deep duty.
And that was mark-kaye. Back in a minute. Thank you, and a little bit more mark-kaye.
And I'm still in contact with one of the major book groups.
Oh, yeah.
That helped out with people around the island, and I think it's really unfair the way you're portraying this whole thing. It's not affecting the rich liberals that live on Martha's Vineyard. By this point in the season, they're gone.
Yeah.
The population of that island is probably less than 10,000 people.
10,050 now.
They have a hospital that kind comes in and is staffed by PRN nurses during the off season because they don't have medical staff. They don't actually have more than about 20 businesses that stay open in the off season.
Yeah.
When these people landed, the people that live in Edgartown, Vineyard Haven, and Oak Bluffs, which are the three closest to where the airport is, all brought these people together, opened up the shelters that they use for the homeless people during the winter, and they put these people up and helped them.
That's great.
It had no effect on the liberals that you guys are so up in arms about. It's taking resources away from people on the island, and these people helped.
Yeah, that's true. But, David, what you've just said about the people in Martha's Vineyard, we can say about the people here in Jacksonville, Florida, when we had the same treatment from Joe Biden. People in Arizona and Texas can say it for the last few years since Joe Biden opened up the border. That's great that they're helping in Martha's Vineyard. That's great that they're coming together. That's great that they are facilitating these immigrants. But there's other people around this country that have been forced to do it for years, and nobody cared about it. Only when it's Martha's Vineyard, you'll notice, were people crying and whining and screaming about it and giving it national attention.
I mean, I look at it as a completely different situation because we in Florida, at least, have an infrastructure that can be set to help these people. Martha's Vineyard doesn't have any infrastructure other than the small amount that's provided for the year-round residents.
Yeah, so
which, again, it's less than 10,000 people.
All right, so it's okay for Joe Biden to fly in the middle of the night immigrants on a plane to Jacksonville, Florida, because they have an infrastructure. It's okay for them to ship immigrants to Nashville, Tennessee, because they have an infrastructure. But it's not okay to send them to Martha's Vineyard because they don't have an infrastructure?
I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is a little bit of empathy for a smaller community that can't handle an influx of people is called for here.
I would say, David, and I appreciate what you're saying, and I understand that there's people there that were freaked out, and they've come to help these Venezuelan immigrants, and that's a great thing. I applaud them. But the fact of the matter is, there's no empathy for the red states that have to deal with this every day. There's no empathy for Arizona and Texas and the small border towns, and there's no empathy for the ranchers who wake up and they find illegal immigrants sleeping in their fields and accidentally almost shoot them because they think they could be coyotes killing their chickens or coming after their cattle. There's no empathy for anybody from the Biden administration, from the media, from FEMA, from anywhere, for any Republican town, township, small community, large community, city, state, or legislature that may or may not have an infrastructure, but the minute it's Martha's Vineyard, all of a sudden, you're calling up and asking for empathy. And David, I appreciate you listening, but you've never called up before and asked me to empathize with any other community that has been inundated with illegal immigrants for years. So that's maybe why they're not getting any. Hey, but
So it took him a long time to finally make the point that this guy's late to the party. Why weren't you calling and complaining when 51 immigrants died in the back of a truck? Where were you then? So, anyways, that was mark-kaye, a little bit on, and having a back and forth with a caller on the Martha's Vineyard situation. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Don Lemon. I don't usually play CNN, but this is, I think, rather instructive.
Well, this is coming when, there's all of this wealth, and you hear about it, comes as England is facing rising costs of living, a living crisis, austerity budget cuts, and so on. And then you have those who are asking for reparations for colonialism, and they're wondering, $100 billion, $24 billion here and there, 500 million there. Some people want to be paid back, and members of the public are wondering, why are we suffering when you are, you have all of this vast wealth? Those are legitimate concerns.
Well, I think you're right about reparations in terms of if people want it, though, what they need to do is you always need to go back to the beginning of a supply chain. Where was the beginning of the supply chain? That was in Africa, and when across the entire world, when slavery was taking place, which was the first nation in the world that abolished slavery? The first nation in the world to abolish it. It was started by William Wilberforce, was the British. In Great Britain, they abolished slavery. 2,000 naval men died on the high seas trying to stop slavery. Why? Because the African kings were rounding up their own people. They had them on cages waiting in the beaches. No one was running into Africa to get them. And I think you're totally right. If reparations need to be paid, we need to go right back to the beginning of that supply chain and say who was rounding up their own people and having them handcuffed in cages. Absolutely. That's where they should start. And maybe, I don't know, the descendants of those families where they died in the high seas trying to stop the slavery, that those families should receive something too, I think, at the same time.
It's an interesting discussion, Hillary. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. We'll continue.
And again, that was Don Lemon, and I think the response to his question or statement, if you will, was absolutely fascinating. Thank you. And now, Alex Epstein.
To take the side.
You could have the goal of advanced human flourishing on Earth, and if CO2 emissions were negative enough, a big priority could be reducing CO2 emissions, but it wouldn't be because their impact, it would be because they're a really bad impact if that were the case. But when you look at them from a pro-human perspective, it's very hard to make that case, A, because they are coupled with huge benefits of fossil fuels, and in particular, they're coupled with what I call climate mastery benefits. Right. So fossil fuels, unlike, say, an antibiotic or vaccine, they can cure their own side effects, which is a really amazing thing. They could make drought worse, hypothetically, but they can make us 10 times safer from drought through irrigation and through different drought relief measures. And we're, in fact,
building things.
Yeah.
I mean, all things that are built occur because of fossil fuels.
Yeah, I mean, I think of it as their machine calories, right? So every machine that we use is powered, on average, 80% by fossil fuels. And so what we see is you have to acknowledge that, hey, climate-related disaster deaths are down 98% over the last 100 years. Drought-related deaths in particular are down 99%. So what's really hard is when you think about CO2, it's actually really hard once you factor in climate mastery to think of a big problem that could occur. Because if you think about, okay, warming, like how bad can warming get? Well, we know the planet has had 10 or 15 times more CO2 and it didn't burn up, and it doesn't even perfectly correlate with warming, but we know life has thrived when there's 25 degrees Fahrenheit, 16 degrees Celsius warmers, 14 degrees Celsius warmer temperatures. So again, and the way it works is it's what's called the diminishing or logarithmic effect. So new molecules of CO2 warm, but they warm less than the last. Kind of like once you use your gas over 55 miles an hour, you need more gas to get the same effect. So what you would expect is what you call lukewarming. You could have the goal of advanced human flourishing on Earth.
To take the side of the less hysterical and extremist libs here, why can't we just move to solar or wind or nuclear? Well, usually they don't mention nuclear. I suppose I would say nuclear.
Yes, but that's notable. Or hydro either.
So why? Well, please talk about those as well. But then specifically, why fossil fuels?
So, but I think it is notable and revealing of the motives of the other side that the most plausible alternatives to fossil fuels, nuclear and hydro, they are the biggest opponents of. Right. And in particular, I mean, we just had Joe Biden has an appointee to what's called the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which is really the Nuclear Destruction Commission. In its 47-year existence, it has not approved one plant from beginning to end. So it's essentially stopped the nuclear industry, made it prohibitively expensive. And the green movement is the leader of this. So the same people who claim to care so much about CO2 emissions are also the biggest opponents of nuclear, which doesn't emit CO2. And it's the only alternative with a track record of being relatively low cost that can theoretically scale around the world. Hydro is great. It can be low cost, but it can't scale everywhere because it depends on certain topography. Like you can't use it in really flat places and that kind of thing. So they're so against nuclear, also against hydro. And so this confirms my idea that it's really all about human impact is evil. It's not about so much fear of CO2, but just the belief that we shouldn't split the atom. It's unnatural. We shouldn't create a new type of waste, even though that waste is pretty benign. It's pretty easy to deal with. So it's really a hostility toward human impact. So when we see that they're insisting on solar and wind above all things, that should have a religious quality to it. Like there's some reason why they want this. And the reason is pretty clear. They consider those natural. right? They think of it as, they're renewable. We're living in harmony with the sun. Whereas from a human flourishing perspective, renewable is not a real word. You don't care about that. You just care about what's cost effective, and that's part of a long-term strategy, and you're okay with using one thing, one 500-year period, and one thing, one 5,000-year period, right? So it's important that it has this religious quality that's saying, like, but this primitive, like, natural is the goal.
To take the...
And that was Alex Epstein. I've read from one of his books about fossil fuels. Back in a minute. Thank you. Back to the student loan thing, because I was thinking about making the presumption for the status quo and how that works more specifically with student loans. And I was thinking about it, and as I was thinking about it, it occurred to me that there's something everybody on the planet is missing, including me until right now, and that is, how did the students get in so much debt in the first place, right? You got some people that are in debt $100,000, $200,000. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's no way you can get a credit card for that much credit unless you can show that you're credit worthy, right? So how do the students get it? Simple. You don't have to prove you're credit worthy to get a student loan. All you have to do is show them that if you already have another student loan, it's current, and or you have no other student loans. That's it. That's all you have to do. You fill out the paperwork and you get the money. There's no credit worthiness situation. And the reason I was thinking about this was because I thought, well, it seems to me if they're oppressed, these people are under the heavy burden of debt, then the first thing you would think is, well, then why don't they file bankruptcy? Because again, authority and responsibility are commensurate. You assume the authority to get debt, you assume the responsibility to pay it off. Well, they can't because, there is crushing weight of debt. Why not file bankruptcy? And the reason they don't is because they're not given a credit worthiness. They're not getting these loans because they're credit worthy. They don't have to show income. They don't have to show an ability and a willingness to pay it off. So that would be, if you're going to reform this system, that's the place to start. You've got to start making sure that these loans are done on a solid financial basis. You're going to have to start means testing these loans. If you don't have the wherewithal, you don't have the money, you can't prove that you can pay these loans back, you don't get them. Period. See, because the overall problem here is Keynesian economics and the minimum wage. And until the minimum wage is either made flexible, it goes up and down, or better yet, abolished, then we are going to have credential creep, continuing credential creep, and you're going to, or what they call credential inflation, where the businesses are going to continue to ask for higher and higher levels of education for the same jobs, and therefore then everybody has to go to school, which drives up the prices, et cetera, et cetera. And so until we get rid of the minimum wage, all that the pressure is going to be on people to go out and be overqualified, because pretty soon it's going to get to the point where you're going to have a bachelor's degree to be a fry cook. That's another reason why so many businesses are switching to automation. Switch to automation, you get out of this trap. Now, the businesses are wrong. They shouldn't do automation. What they should do is go to the government and demand that the minimum wage be either made flexible or done away with in its entirety. That's what should happen. But in the meantime, it seems to me creditworthiness is the issue here. You want to save students from crushing amounts of student debt, then you have to means test it. You have to give credit only to the credit worthy. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now Tucker Carlson, as a follow-up, I suppose, on the Martha's Vineyard Democrat debacle.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson's Happy Tuesday. We'll admit it up front, we can't get off this Martha's Vineyard story because there's just so much there. So last week, you'll recall, our Venezuelan visitors to this country, our brothers and sisters, as they're now known on CNN, took what amounted to the shortest vacation ever recorded to Martha's Vineyard. They were on that island for just hours, less than 2 full days. It was hardly enough time to pick up a fair trade coffee at Mocha Mott's in Vineyard Haven or go kiteboarding on South Beach. In fact, we have literally been talking about their trip longer than it lasted. It was that brief. On the other hand, so was the moon landing. So was the Wright brothers' first flight at Kitty Hawk. Duration is no measure of effect. Those brief hours our Venezuelan brothers and sisters spent on Martha's Vineyard changed history and left what they're calling an indelible mark on the people who live there. They enriched us, said one resident. We were happy to help them on their journey. Unfortunately, as it turned out, that journey ended abruptly at a military base on Cape Cod, where our Venezuelan brothers and sisters are now being held against their will. Prisoners in a country they thought was their own. There are no Mocha Mott's where they are now. Kiteboarding is completely out of the question. It's just a bitter dream at this point. Now, the people of Martha's Vineyard knew this was going to happen, and yet none of them thought to tell their Venezuelan brothers and sisters before it happened. Quote, I kept telling them it was like a dormitory, said Jackie Stallings, who lives on the island, as soldiers arrived to deport her Venezuelan siblings. I didn't want to say, you're going to a military base. Well, of course not. It's a dormitory. Just like your dad sent your elderly dog to a farm, because he'll be happier there. But the Venezuelans are not happier in military lockup. They loved Martha's Vineyard. As they told MSNBC, they considered it a paradise.
They left here a few minutes ago. They moved to Cape Cod, to the joint base in Cape Cod, with new clothes, new cell phones, having talked to lawyers for the first time and saying that they were actually brought to paradise. They don't resent it for now, and they know they're the lucky ones.
So finally, one reporter over at NBC News tells the truth about what is actually a pretty sad story. Our Venezuelan brothers and sisters came to this country for a better life, and unlike so many, they actually found it. They arrived in one of the prettiest and most affluent destinations on the planet, an idyllic island with unlimited resources and many thousands of empty beds. And best of all, a population that claimed to love them. No person is illegal, read the lawn signs. But it was all a lie. 50 brown people was too many for the people of Martha's Vineyard. They called in the army to have them removed, like trash, as one island resident said. So actually, judging by their behavior and not simply by their lawn signs, which is the best way to judge people, the people of Martha's Vineyard are not especially compassionate. In fact, they're small-minded and cheap and pretty nasty, as any waiter or babysitter who works on the island can tell you. So once again, the ones who claim to be the best people are actually the worst people. Remember when Jimmy Swaggart got busted with hookers and porn? It's very much like that. The truth turns out to be the opposite of what they told you it was. It's highly embarrassing. It's highly embarrassing. But here's the weird thing. On Martha's Vineyard, they're not embarrassed at all. Jimmy Swaggart famously apologized for his sins because he had shame. But the people of Martha's Vineyard have no shame, and so they're not apologizing. In fact, against all evidence, they're now bragging about how wonderful they are. Yesterday, Carrie Pickett of the Washington Times caught up with Martha's Vineyard's senior senator. That would be Ms. Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts. Listen to Elizabeth Warren's version of the Martha's Vineyard story.
Do you think Martha's Vineyard is getting a bad rap right now?
Martha's Vineyard?
Yeah.
No. Well, I think the people of Martha's Vineyard opened their hearts and were helpful to the migrants who were deceived and dropped there in a privately chartered jet and treated like a prop for a governor who's just trying to make news.
Well, if nothing else, it's interesting to see history that we've watched unfold, a story in which the facts are not at all in dispute, get rewritten in real time. And you wonder how many other stories have been rewritten, but we can see this one being rewritten. In Elizabeth Warren's telling, actually, the people of Martha's Vineyard are the heroes, and Ron DeSantis is the villain because he deceived them. Now, we just heard, and it's again factually not in dispute, that island residents deceived their Venezuelan siblings by telling them they were just going to a dorm. They're not being locked up on a military base like terrorists. So actually, the people of Martha's Vineyard, the residents there, are the ones who did the tricking. They tricked the Venezuelans into going to a military base. But that wasn't deception. No, according to Elizabeth Warren, it was an act of love. But at some point, whatever, the people of Martha's Vineyard got what they wanted. Everything is back to normal there. The people who live there are relieved. There are not going to be 50 needing minorities in their midst to spoil usual festivities, and that would include the Food and Wine Festival.
Each year for the past decade, more than 2,500 food and wine enthusiasts converge on the island of Martha's Vineyard for a culinary and wine extravaganza.
So have an oyster, then taste the wine, then have your other oyster and taste the wine again. That's the routine for each one. So 2 oysters per wine. See how the oyster tastes on its own. See how you like the flavors of the wine with the oyster.
The Martha's Vineyard Food and Wine Festival. 4 days and 3 nights of celebration.
So just so you know, you taste the wine, and then you eat the oyster, and then you taste the wine again, okay? And the way they mesh in your mouth, those flavors, the complexity of them, it's like an explosion on your palate. And that's why thousands of people come to Martha's Vineyard every year for that festival. But guess who doesn't come? Venezuelans. Unless they're serving the oysters and pouring the wine. So really, we could go on at great length about this because it's just such a great story and reveals so much. But it's much bigger than the now established fact that Martha's Vineyard is populated by nasty liberals who don't tip and don't actually want colored people in their midst. That's true. We know that now. But the bigger story, and the one that affects the rest of us, the other 340 million people who live here, is that what we saw in Martha's Vineyard is, in fact, just a taste of what is absolutely the official policy of the Democratic Party. And it is this. If your town votes the right way, then you get military protection. The military shows up immediately, 50 people, not hurting anybody. And the army comes to remove them. Can you imagine? Talk about a 911 call. It's pretty great. All you need to do is vote 80% for Joe Biden, and you can do that. And throw some donations his way, too. But what about everybody else? Well, everyone else is SOL. And that would include all of us. Over the past 11 months, American authorities have encountered more than 2 million illegals along the southern border. That's the highest number ever recorded by the U.S. government. At least another 1 million were allowed into this country as so-called economic migrants, meaning they want better jobs, because who doesn't want a better job? Hundreds, thousands more, we don't know the number, but clearly hundreds of thousands just sneaked in. That's according to the official data. Now, how many of those are headed to military bases for deportation? In how many cases did the U.S. military arrive to solve what is so clearly a disaster? 0, because it wasn't Martha's Vineyard. Now, we've been making a documentary on this. A documentary on the borders called Battle for the Borders, coming out later this year. And in the course of reporting that out, we obtained this footage showing how some of these illegal aliens entered this country. These pictures were shot on July 23rd this year.
How you doing, everyone? State Police. Where are you from? Huh? Pakistan. What y'all doing here? Keep your hands out of your pocket. You got any weapons on you? You got an ID? No IDs?
So when people in Martha's Vineyard think of illegal immigration, they really think groundskeepers and waiters and people who work at the back end of the kitchen, people who clean up or prepare the food. That's what illegal immigration is to them. They're not really thinking, none of us are really thinking that people might be showing up from Pakistan. Really, Pakistan? They didn't walk. And by the way, isn't Pakistan the place where ISIS has just called for jihadis to enter the United States and kill Americans? Why are these guys walking along a road in Texas? Now, during their interview with the police, both of the men you just saw admitted they were here illegally. They said they each paid thousands of dollars to be smuggled into the United States. This is very common now. It's not the immigration you remember. Who are these people? Do they mean us harm? It's not simply a matter of competing for jobs with American citizens. It's potentially a grave threat. And a lot of people like this are coming across the border right now. Here's Fox's Bill Melugin.
For the very first time, a brand new Fox News drone equipped with thermal imaging captures images of mass illegal crossings in the middle of the night in Eagle Pass, Texas this morning. Migrants could be seen crossing the river and walking onto private property, where over 100 gathered and waited for Border Patrol processing. Sometimes the Del Rio sector here gets upwards of 2,000 illegal crossings in a single day, and this was only one of 3 huge groups we have already seen so far this morning, and it's not even noon yet out here. Take a look at this second group we saw. This was another group of about 200 who crossed illegally and started walking along a local highway out here. This is how it is in Eagle Pass. You can just be driving down the road and you'll see large groups of several hundred migrants just walking down the highway waiting to be picked up and apprehended by Border Patrol.
So we're just getting word right now that the White House, many White House officials are telling, quote, journalists that they are very annoyed by Bill Melugin's reporting. It's, quote, alarmist. In other words, unlike reporters at the Washington Post and the New York Times, Bill Melugin doesn't think that he works for Joe Biden. He's taking pictures of what's actually happening. And that's wrong. What's interesting, given what is happening, which is that we are being invaded by people who have no right to be here for reasons that we don't really understand, is that none of the people who are complaining about Ron DeSantis sending 50 Venezuelans to Martha's Vineyard have said a word about what else is happening on the border. And a lot is happening. It's an ongoing humanitarian disaster, a tragedy for the people being trafficked, and they are being trafficked. But it's also an ongoing disaster for us who live here. It's our country. As Melugin reported, human traffickers are loading more than a dozen people into the backs of cars right now, which is a disaster. Watch this.
Not making a statement at all. And Uvalde.
Well, we get the point there. So, that was Tucker Carlson from his show about Martha's Vineyard more specifically and illegal immigration generally. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. Until next time, remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.